Everybody? Semester's over. So thank you all very much for being here today. I'm Chris Lemons, faculty in special education, and I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Matt Brock from The Ohio State University.
Just Ohio State.
I'm really glad that y'all are taking some time out of your day to come listen to him. I really appreciate that you're doing it out of the semester, so thank you for being here. So Matt Brock is an assistant professor of special ed at Ohio State University. He's a faculty associate at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy, and his lines of research focus primarily on two things. So first, he studies the effects of practitioner training on implementation of evidence-based practice and outcomes for students with significant disabilities. Second, he studies avenues for supporting the inclusion of students with significant disabilities in general ed classrooms. Prior to getting his PhD from Vanderbilt, Matthew worked as a preschool and elementary special ed teacher. He was also in the U.S. Peace Corps as a special education worker, which is pretty cool. Matt received the Emergent Leader Award from TASH as an indication of his early promise as a junior scholar. And, very importantly, he is also one of the IES Early Career Grant Award winners. So that's a really good indication that everything he's about to tell you now is going to be from someone who really is a bright, shining star coming out of the program and is a really person who's going to be a strong leader in the future. So we're really glad to have you. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chris, for inviting me and for that lovely introduction. Before I get started, I'm just interested in knowing whom I'm talking to. So all of you are doc students. How many of you are doc students in special education? Is that everybody? Most people. A couple others. Folks in the back, what fields are you in?
We're in hearing and speech sciences.
Gotcha, so super aligned, so it should be relevant to you. And how many people are first years, finishing up their first year, second year, third year, and we'll say fourth year plus? All right, excellent. Okay, so it gives me a nice feel. So some of you, might be a little bit of a ways off, and some of you, this is relevant immediately to you. So what Chris asked me to do today was just to give you guys some practical advice on how to look for a good job, how to actually be successful as an assistant professor in a new academic position. So that's what I'm going to do. In order to try to not make this just like a laundry list of advice that I have for you, I've tried to organize this with a little bit of structure. So first I'm going to talk about applying for jobs. I've broken that down to the big components that I think will help make you successful. Some of these I'm sure that you've already heard a lot from your advisors or from peers, so I'm trying to give you things that maybe I didn't know when I was applying for jobs, and things I've kind of learned over time after being on a couple of search committees and seeing, wow, people really stood out who did these particular things well. Next, I'll talk about what it takes to be successful in a new job, and a lot of basically tricks, habits, things that I learned as I went that I would have loved if someone would have told me on the front end. So hopefully that will be helpful for you guys too. So first I'll talk a little bit about applying for jobs. So how many of you will be applying for jobs over the next academic year? Anticipate doing that? A lot of hands come up. Okay, so this will be relevant to you shortly. Being on a search committee was a really eye-opening experience for me. And the first thing that I learned is that, like any committee work, people are trying to balance their time trying to hire someone with all the other things that they're trying to do in their lives. So people who wrote a 10-page statement of purpose, we didn't read the whole thing, right? So longer is not better when you're writing that statement of purpose. I heard that from my advisor, but it didn't really click home until I was the person that was reading these for a bunch of people, and that was practically important. The other thing that I learned, how many of you does Lynn Fuchs still teach ProSim 3 with grant writing? How many of you already taken that? Okay, so what I'm going to say is going to be redundant with Lynn Fuchs' advice for writing a grant. So she gave us lots of examples of written grants where people had italicized the topic sentences out of the argument in the grant, and you could pull out those italicized topic sentences and you would get the gist of their argument that they were trying to put forward. People who do that in their materials when they apply for jobs, people are going to read that. It's super organized, easy to follow. I can skim it and get the general gist. So if you have somebody on that search committee who is trying to skim instead of read carefully, they're still going to get the general idea from what you're trying to say, which is good. The next thing that I learned is that we were looking for people who had a clear idea of what they were going to do after they got on the job, and that it was reasonable. So I read some letters of people who said they were going to get like a Goal 4 IES grant in the first year that they were going to start their job. And that was a red flag that, like, you probably haven't really thought this through. I'm not sure if you know what a Goal 4 grant is. This isn't a very feasible or realistic plan for you. So you do want to be ambitious, but you want to articulate a pathway that someone will read that and believe, yes, based on this person's trajectory and where they're going to be in the first year, this is something that they could actually do. That's all I have for a research statement, because my presumption is that you guys are going to get a ton of feedback from your mentors about your research statements that you submit. So I was giving you kind of some supplemental things. What I want to talk about more is appearing smarter than you really are when you are doing phone interviews or Skype interviews or Google Hangout or however you do it with folks. How many of you love talking on the phone? All right. Then you are like me. I hate talking on the phone. I feel like I'm really bad at on the fly coming up with responses to what people are asking me. And I especially don't like the phone because I feel like I get very little feedback from what I'm actually saying. So I don't know how people are reacting. And especially if I'm talking to like a room of 5 people that are all sitting together, the whole time I'm wondering, are they all looking at each other reacting to what I'm saying and I can't see what's going on? So for me, when I was getting ready to go through the interview process, I knew that this was something I needed to work hard to be super prepared and decrease my anxiety. And the good news I have for you is, as someone who's awful talking on the phone, it can be done. You can be really good at it. The good thing that I have to tell you is that I have learned, which was surprising to me, that search committees are very bad at being creative with the questions that they ask you over the phone. They're all the same. I had phone interviews with 4 different places, and the overlap between the questions was crazy. And before I actually did any of these interviews, Eric Carter was my advisor. I asked him, can you give me the questions that you use when you just hired somebody here at Vanderbilt? Anyone that I knew that I just put on a search committee and asked for those questions. And I saw that there's a lot of overlap between them. Here are questions that I virtually guarantee that you're going to get in a phone interview. Someone will ask you, what's your 3-year or 5-year plan for research? They'll expect you to lay that out and articulate that clearly. That's something that would be really stressful for me to do if I had planned in advance, but you know you're going to get that question, so map out your answer and be in good shape. Other ones are how do you plan to apply for external funding? Usually some question about just making sure that you're planning to teach your students something reasonable about how to be a good teacher. So this is just one university's way of asking what do you think is important, what makes a good teacher that you're actually going to teach them. And also, do you think that you could teach in the courses that we have here? That's a question that I would do your homework and figure out. You can usually Google and see what all the major courses are that are at that university, and you can be ready to say, I know that you have this course, and this course, and here are the ones that I feel like I could teach them why. That impresses people. And they also really want to know why you want to go to that specific university. So make sure you make up a reason if you don't have one, because they want to know that you've really thought about their university in particular and that you've articulated an answer that satisfies them. And usually there's some question about diversity, so working with diverse colleagues or working with diverse populations in your research. So like I said, the good news is that you are going to get questions like this and that people are not very creative in asking different questions. So when I did this, I made bullet points for every single one of those questions and others that I got. And I only got asked one question that I didn't have bullet points for. So there was no thinking on the fly and trying to figure out what I was going to say. It was me calmly going through my list of bullet points. I didn't script everything because I didn't want to sound like a robot, but just went through my talking points for each one. And instead of focusing on the content of what I needed to say, I could focus on my delivery. So I felt like I sounded far more intelligent and coherent on the phone than I normally would. So as someone who's terrible at that, who was able to use these strategies, know that you're probably better than me at baseline, so you can be even better once you do these things. I did the same thing if I was in a Google Hangout or a Skype interview, but I tried to be sneaky, so I would be covert. So instead of having this in front of me, so it's obvious that I was reading, I probably could have done this a more high-tech way than what I did. But I got cereal boxes, and I put them on the table behind my laptop. And so I put them in a way that I was looking just past the camera, so it looked like I was looking at them in the eye, but I was looking just past them to these printed sheets that were stapled onto cereal boxes. You could also tape them to the wall, anything of the sort. But I don't think anyone suspected that I was reading, ever. But if you have it on your screen, you're going to have to look down or to the side, so then somebody might catch on. Still probably wouldn't be the end of the world, but I wanted to give the impression that I am just spontaneously coming up with these brilliant answers. And you can convince them of the same thing. And you probably have a better system than my cereal box system. That was just what I did. The other thing is that I've only learned being on the side that I'm actually interviewing people, and something that really didn't occur to me as I was answering questions, is if you get a question and you're flustered and you're not sure how you're going to respond, it is okay to say, let me take a minute to think about that, even though it's initially going to be awkward for you to do that. Because I think that's what makes me really nervous about phone conversations when I don't know what I'm going to get asked, is I think I have to respond immediately, and if I'm flustered, I got to say something dumb instead of something thoughtful. But if I take a second to compose myself, that would be fine. And if you've already scripted most of your answers, you're only going to have to do that occasionally. And I think just knowing that you have the option to do that just will lower your stress level to the extent that you may not even have to do it anyway. But perfectly acceptable thing to do. On the search committees that I was on, when people did that, no one ever reacted negatively. Just waited, and then people usually came out with a really good answer after that. I should say that you guys can interrupt me with questions at any point, so that's totally fine. I'll keep cruising along, but just shoot your hand up and I will be happy to stop if people have individual things that they want to ask. So that's what I have for phone video interviews. Next, in-person interviews. How many of you have already been on in-person interviews? Just kidding. I've seen you on an in-person interview. You did really well. I have some things basically from watching that search process and other search processes, things that I was trained to do while I was here and that Eric mentored me to do, and also that I see really stand out from people who have done those things and people who haven't done those things. And I can tell you from having seen Katie that I think you've heard some of the suggestions that I'm already going to give. First, people really like it when they don't have to introduce themselves and you know who they are and something about what they've already done. And chances are that where you're going to interview, not everybody on that faculty has set the world on fire with their research. So you might take a little extra homework because you might not know those people before you go. But it makes people feel good to know that you've taken an interest in them before you get there. Something else that helped decrease my anxiety level was I made long lists of questions that I was going to ask when I got there. Because everybody asks if you have any questions. And I didn't want to just be the guy that's like, no. So I made enough questions that I never was going to run out. And I got through probably about half of them in a 2-day visit. But you can ask someone else who's already been on a job search what questions they've used, and you can add to their list or personalize it for that particular job search that you're going on.
Can I ask a quick question on that?
Absolutely.
As someone who's been on a search committee before,
Sure.
Are there any questions that candidates have asked that you felt were really useful for them specifically, or just any recommended questions in general?
Sure, that's a really good question. So other folks can jump in if they have a perspective. But I was always really impressed with questions that made it clear to me that, like, I have a plan. I'm thinking ahead to what that plan would be like to implement at this university, and ask specific questions about how I would make that work. So not only do I have a plan for external funding, I'm asking about specific resources for pre and post support that I would get with this university, what that would look like. So you really get the sense the person is envisioning themselves actually working there and really weighing whether how the supports that exist there are going to help them to be a productive scholar. Basically, just by asking those, you're illustrating that you're really serious about being productive once you get there. Anything you want to add to that?
That's a great response.
Okay. The other piece that was really good advice that I got before I went that I learned was is really, really true. is that when you eat meals, that is part of the interview process. And sometimes that is more important than the formal part of the process. So I'm going to give advice based on somebody who likes to eat a lot of food. So so based on that, I went in knowing that I am not going to meet my caloric needs by eating daintily during these interviews. So I brought a bunch of power bars with me, and I would pre-eat before every meal, and during the break I would eat again. So I would actually be full, and I'd order something really small that I wasn't nervous about getting on myself while I was actually being interviewed, so I could relax in that situation. Because even though it's an informal setting, people are getting to know you, get a feel for you as a person. I think is almost equally important to the job talk and the other things that you're going to do. People want to like the person that they're bringing, so they're going to work with them closely. The other big piece is the job talk, and it always surprises me that there are some people who it looks like they're giving the job talk like for the first time when they actually come and interview at the university. I can't imagine doing that, and I doubt any of you would do that anyway. But it is obvious that people who have practiced and are really polished, and they really stand out compared to other folks. This is always a hard sell with my own doc students, because I tell them, like, you need to practice in front of your peers here to get friendly feedback. And they're like, oh, I'm just too nervous to practice in front of my peers. So I have to tell them, if you're nervous now, think about the real deal. This is a cakewalk. Do it with us, work out the kinks, and then we'll be ready for the real thing. There are just things that are really helpful to get an outside perspective of that don't go over as well when you're actually doing the real thing in person that you thought that they were in your head. Something that I've learned just giving talks in general is that there are some things that you see other people do that you can emulate, and there are some people that you see other things people do that you just can't pull that off, right? So I learned kind of early as a doc student that Eric Carruthers, my advisor, would do this beautiful job of just getting people really passionate about certain things by at a parallel way, presenting really convincing data and giving an emotional speech kind of at the same time. I learned that I cannot do that. I am much better at trying to just stick to a simple, logical argument than I am doing that, because I just don't have the same natural skill set that he does. Other people are really good at making certain kinds of jokes, but if you tried to imitate giving that joke, it would not go well. So my advice is just to stay within yourself so you're comfortable with what you're doing and you're confident that it's going to go over well. If you can practice a few times doing the full thing for your peers, I think that's excellent. Something that I would advise people to do after seeing a ton of tech fails is do not depend on the internet for your job talk. So if you have a video, have it on a hard drive or a flash drive instead of trying to depend on the internet someplace you've not been before. And also save your slides in multiple ways. So if you see at the last minute that unlike Vanderbilt, you don't have 20 different ways to hook up your computer, that you can shove your flash drive into somebody else's and make it work. I can't believe how many tech fails I see at job talks or people that come into our university to do that. And at least where I am, like, I often end up being like the tech guy. Like, there's not someone with real expertise that's there, so we're just winging it. So the easier that you can make it so that's not an obstacle, that's better, I think. The other piece is just knowing your audience and kind of adjusting your talk to them, what you need to share to them. So some places that you interview in special education, like some place like Vanderbilt or Kansas, if you have a talk that's for the whole department, everybody is a scholar in special education because it's a super large department. But someplace like Ohio State or Michigan State, a number of other universities, special ed is just one program within a larger department. So you might have to give more context, more explanation on the front end if you have people who are completely outside of your field and they're not going to be quickly familiar with what your content area is. Another example I can think of me personalizing a job talk is when I did my job talk at Ohio State. I knew that our university has a tremendous tradition in applied behavior analysis, and almost everyone there does exclusively single case design work. And I don't. I also use group design. And I knew that when I got to those group design studies, I was going to have to explain those in a different way than I was going to explain the single case designs that everybody was going to be familiar with. And that was a change that I made. That said, once you have a kind of a skeleton for your job talk, it's really easy to make those little tweaks once you kind of have a blueprint for what you're going to do. Any questions about job talks? Okay, so that was it for getting a job. So hopefully that's sufficient advice. We're going to pretend you've already gotten a job, and we're fast forwarding, and you're actually in a job, and you're trying to figure out how you can be successful. It might surprise you a little bit that I'm going to get to the research part, but a big part that I'm going to emphasize is how you budget time for other responsibilities so you can focus on your research. Because the biggest challenge that I had was trying to figure out how to balance all these other responsibilities with time that I spent on research. Because as a doc student, after you finish your coursework, many of you are honed in only on working on your advisor's projects and doing your own work in your own dissertation. You're not having to figure out how to split that time. And I think that's something that's really challenging for folks starting out. And you may or may not see good models in your peers for how to divide that time in a way that's going to allow you to do the work that's important to you. And a big reason why I think it's important to figure out how to budget your time is that you want to be able to do your whole job well and actually have time left for yourself and your family if you have one. So you have a good life outside of work and you feel recharged when you go back into the office. So I'm going to talk first about service and teaching, not because I think they're the most important, but because I want to talk about how do you make sure you do a good job, but budget that time so it doesn't take over what you're doing. So what I advise people to do for service is that you get really clear expectations from your department chair, from your peers, about what do people really expect for service, for promotion to associate professor, and plan to do just enough to meet those expectations. You do not need to go soaring over them. You need to figure out how you can budget your time to just do exactly what you need to do, because this, as long as you do enough, I don't think this is where people look critically. This is something I learned over time, is that there's some people that you can say yes to and some people that you can say no to, and some people that you're always going to have to say yes to who are asking you about service things. So if your dean comes to you, if my dean comes to me and says, Matt, I would really like you to do this, I have to say yes. If it's my colleague who wants to basically reduce their own service load by asking me to take on something that they don't really want to do, I do not have to say yes. But it takes some time and maneuvering to figure out when it's okay to say yes and say no, and I think it's a skill to learn how to nicely say no without actually saying no. So you can compliment your colleague and say, that sounds like a really important job, and I think you're really well suited to do that. There's other ways that you can do that too. So you can softly deliver that. Hopefully you'll all work at places that are supportive and try to clear the deck for assistant professors. I think we try to do that at Ohio State, because everybody can remember themselves being an assistant professor and trying to enable that person to be successful. Other advice is never spontaneously volunteer, ever. So if anyone says, hey, anybody want to do this? Never raise your hand. I learned that the hard way, because sometimes you hear something and say, that's really important, I want to really help with that, and I always regretted doing it. You do not have to go looking for service obligations, they will come find you. So just wait for invitations and be selective so that you meet that bar that your department chair said, yes, you got to do at least this much in order to do enough with service. Service to the profession. Something that I'm surprised by is how many invitations I get to review from journals I have never heard of before. So I have learned that you gotta Google the journal and make sure it's legit before you actually say yes or no to review. If it's something you've never heard of, you Google it, it doesn't look like it's legit, just always say no. Chris and I were actually having a conversation about this earlier today, because he was talking about it at his point in his career. He's got to a point where he feels like he can be more selective, even with good journals, about whether he says yes or no to reviewing. I feel like I'm getting to that point, but I'm not quite there. So I say yes to any time that it's a good journal that I think I would love to be on that journal's editorial board. and I want to demonstrate as a guest reviewer that I'm a competent reviewer and hope that they're going to add me at a later time. So I say yes a lot of the time. The only time that I say no is when I think that I've already said yes to enough reviews in this time frame that I cannot take time to do a good job. Because something I've learned is that it takes at least 3 hours for me to do a really good job of carefully reviewing a paper. Sometimes it takes longer than that. But I've learned that I'm not going to be able to shrink that time much. I'm just going to have to budget it, and that's the time that it's going to take. And I always try to envision, how would I feel if I were the person that wrote this paper and I got a review from you? So not only do you want to demonstrate to the editor of the journal, I'm competent, I do a good job, ask me to do this again, I also want to make sure I would be okay with the review that I received if I were actually someone who had submitted it. So I kind of have a process. So it used to take me like a whole day to review a paper and feel like I did a good job. And I feel like I've done a lot of work to get it down to 2 to 3 hours. Maybe I'm slow, I don't know. But that's the amount of time that it takes me. And I have a process that I kind of go through to hold myself to that amount of time. So just practical things that I do is that I skip certain sections of the paper to kind of get a framework from what I'm going to do. I know some people will just like start with the introduction and start reading. I don't do that because I feel like an introduction is a part of the paper that's totally fixable, right? So if somebody writes just an awful introduction, but they've implemented a high quality study, then reading the introduction that's awful isn't going to shape the overall advice that I'm going to give about this is a really well-run study and here's some ways that you can fix your introduction. But if there's really big problems with the method itself, that's where I'm going to focus my feedback. So that's where I prioritize first. Read the abstract, get a gist, then go to methods and results. And then I get a pretty good feel for the direction that I'm going to go in the review, and then I can think about that direction as I'm reading through the introduction and discussion. I feel like I use my time much more efficiently. Before I did that, I find myself writing a whole page of feedback for the introduction. I would get to the method and realize like that was all irrelevant feedback because this is what the research questions actually were, and none of the feedback that I just wrote actually helped them get to those research questions. So going that way helped. Also, I have a skeleton template that I use when I review, so it saves me time. So it basically says, as the first paragraph that starts with, I read this paper, it was about this, has blanks for those things. I really enjoyed X and X, I fill those things in. I have some feedback specific to these 3 big ideas, and I've organized my feedback by section of the paper below. And just having those little things to fill in keeps me on track, helps me write it faster. I know these are really kind of mundane things, but it actually helps me stick to the time that I budgeted. Also, I've learned to take notes as I read, otherwise I forget. So you get interrupted while you're doing your review, someone asks you a question, you try to pick that back up. If you take notes as you go, you can do a lot better job with that. And the other thing that I do is I found that I can review while I'm working out on a treadmill or elliptical, which is good if I can multitask. I'll also highlight other tasks that I think are possible for ellipticals and treadmills. I have the luxury that our university gym is connected to my office building by a sky bridge. So I go over there like 3 times a day, once to do a proper workout and other couple times to do this kind of stuff where I think I can not just sit at a stationary position and do something else. I find that pairing doing a review with something that doesn't involve just sitting actually makes me look forward to it. So I get more excited about doing the review if I'm getting a workout at the same time. I'm not going super fast. I can't actually run on a treadmill. I'm walking slowly and reading it at the same time. So don't you the other thing that I do is I will have like the paper printed out, and then I'll have my phone, and I'll have an email open to myself, and I will just voice text myself all of my feedback while I'm walking, so that way I can actually keep walking and do it at the same time. Take some practice, but I'm confident you can do it. Any question about budgeting time for service?
And I'll just add one thing to the review. I also think it's important to think about the amount of time you devote to a review related to the quality of that paper.
Absolutely.
So if there's an extremely low quality paper that has a very small chance of being fixable, then I think it is useful to think that, I don't need to write them 8 pages of detailed feedback. I need to pick out the big components that are making this very problematic. Whereas if something is more of a revise and resubmit, that's really where you devote a lot more time to giving people real critical, clear feedback. And I think when I was first starting, those very, very low quality papers, I would still devote this amount of time or more, and I don't think that's a very good use of your time.
Absolutely. And hopefully, starting with method and results give you kind of a sense early on whether you're in that situation. Anybody else comments about service?